you. Deputy Daly.
Taoiseach, yesterday you told us when Deputy Halligan correctly registered the importance of marking Mayday that we've moved on since the days of Big Jim. Now, you're obviously not aware of the massive unemployment, the forced emigration, the return of soup kitchens and evictions and children going to school hungry. And it demonstrates really how out of touch your government are with the majority of citizens in this state. An out-of-touchness which is demonstrated graphically by your handling of the long overdue X-case legislation. Legislation which was necessary because of the 1983 referendum, which fudged the issue and equated the right to life of the unborn with that of the woman. And rather than addressing that fudge, you've chosen to reinforce it by even changing the title of the bill to one of protecting life during pregnancy, when we all know the legislation is necessary to protect women's lives. Now, for the past 2 weeks, we've been introduced to a new specimen, the Fine Gael backbencher, an entity that nobody knew existed, but now suddenly it's found a voice and a conscience. Where was that voice and conscience when the rights of born children were being decimated by the cuts in child benefit, by the cuts in social welfare payments to disabled youngsters and the cuts in education? Nowhere to be heard. Now their obstructing of this legislation is being presented as a battle to protect the unborn, a battle to stop Irish abortion. The reality is, Taoiseach, that Irish abortion is pretty much the same as every other country's abortion. It's just that it's exported out of here. And of course this bill isn't going to change that, and never was. But what it should have done was to ensure that a woman who needed an abortion to save her life, not her health or her well-being, her life, could get access to that abortion here at home. It should have met the wishes of the majority of Irish people who voted in 2 referenda that that right should include where that risk came from, suicide. Instead, Taoiseach, despite your denials last week that distraught suicidal women wouldn't be dragged before tribunals, we have the spectre of a woman having to present her case to 3 doctors, getting unanimity amongst that. If she doesn't get it, going to another 3. Last time I checked, 3 plus 3 was 6. Now, Taoiseach, I'm glad that this legislation is before us, but let's be clear, what you've presented is the absolute minimum. The clear intention is to make it so restrictive that most women who will be affected will not even bother, that instead they'll continue to make the journey to Britain so that you can continue to pretend that there's no Irish abortion.
Thank you.
So my questions to you, Taoiseach, are: how did you get your Labour Party colleagues to settle for this when SIPTU, ICTU, USI Unite, the National Women's Council and every other organisation has said the opinion of 2 medical practitioners was enough? Why did you bother to convene an expert group and hold hearings into its report and then patently ignore its findings, which said that it was generally considered that 2 doctors of relevant experience and training were enough to make a clinical decision with regard to the physical or mental health conditions of a woman? And finally, Taoiseach, would you not agree that the only reason why we haven't had more maternal deaths because of our lack of abortion in Ireland is precisely because of our proximity to Britain?
Thank you. Taoiseach.
I'm not sure what your question is arising out of all of that. I can certainly testify in regard to the Fine Gael backbenchers that they're interested in all pieces of legislation that come before the House, and they're focused, along with the other members of the government, on getting our country back to work and sorting out our financial difficulties. I'll say to you, Deputy Daly, this bill, the Protection of Life During Pregnancy Bill, is about saving women's lives. It's about saving women's lives. And the law, as I said, on abortion is not being changed, but in very specific circumstances where there is a real and substantial threat to the life of the mother, a termination is permissible under the law. And each of those terminations that have happened here have been as a consequence of a real and substantial risk to a woman's life, where a medical intervention was necessary to save her life. And as I've pointed out in the earlier question to Deputy Adams, there is a requirement here to uphold the right to life of the unborn, and insofar as is possible, to save the life of the unborn where these situations arise. These proposals are very much in line with what the expert review group proposed. And as you're aware, they also made the point, as was recognised in the ABC case, that the issue of suicide and suicidal intent is far more subjective than in the case of a physical risk or where an emergency arises from a medical point of view. And that's why a multidisciplinary team be involved here. And that's why in those cases, rare though they might be, there is an obstetrician and gynecologist on that team who has to speak and make a judgment and make a call for the protection of the life of the unborn. And it's very necessary in those cases, which are subjective, that there be qualified, experienced, multidisciplinary personnel in order to deal with the constraints, with the parameters of the law here.
Sorry, please, thank you.
Obviously, any legislation that's put forward on any issue has to be within the confines of the Constitution. So clearly a lot of the arguments that are being put forward in that regard are a red herring. Abortion where a woman's life was in danger has been the situation and lawful situation in Ireland for decades. It simply hasn't been legislated for. And the issue is, does your legislation provide that clarity? Now, I'm not really sure why you didn't understand the question, because it was pretty obvious from what I could see. Your government, at the behest of the European Court of Human Rights, decided to go down the path of setting up an expert group. And that expert group said, and maybe you're not hugely familiar with it, but I'll read out to you what they said. It was generally considered that 2 doctors with relevant training and expertise appropriate to the case would be sufficient for making a clinical decision as to the risk to the life of the woman. Pretty clear-cut. An outcome and a conclusion which your government has chosen to ignore. I'm wondering why you also ignored their request to remove the chilling effect of the 18...
Sorry, Deputy. Would you please settle down and let the Deputy make her point, please? Thank you. The Taoiseach will reply. We don't
Thank you,
expect...
Count Corla. I'm wondering why you chose to ignore the call to remove the chilling effect of the 1861 Act, which, while penal servitude for life has been coming off the statute books, it's been replaced with 14 years in jail. Are women who go for abortions in England or who order abortifacients over the internet now to be branded as criminals and subject to this law? Taoiseach, you've made it clear that this bill gives no new rights to women. Your colleague, Taoiseach Gilmore, has tried to say that it vindicates women's rights. It's clear that it doesn't do that. It falls short of the clarity that is needed. I think it's a very regrettable step. While the legislation is welcome, you haven't gone far enough at all, and I think it is subject to massive change in the weeks ahead.
Thank you. Taoiseach to reply.
I don't agree with you that it falls short. This deals specifically with the case of where a woman's life is in danger. It clarifies what the law is. You are selective in your comments, because the expert group did discuss the value of having an obstetrician involved here as a member of the multidisciplinary team, and that's very necessary where there is the case of an unborn child to be heard. As you're aware, in the case of a real and substantial risk to a woman's life arising from self-destruction, additional safeguards are put in place here, and that involves 3 specialists, 1 obstetrician gynecologist and 2 psychiatrists must unanimously agree and certify that the termination of pregnancy is the only treatment that will save the mother's life. And in such cases also, where it's feasible, of course, general practitioners who would know the personnel involved probably better than anybody else and will also be consulted. So it's about saving lives here, providing clarity and certainty for women in respect of access to procedures if there is a substantial risk to their life as distinct from their health. In regard to your comment about penalties, these are consistent with the law as it stands. And as I said, the law on abortion is not being changed. There are no new rights being conferred here. It is a case of legal clarity and certainty for women when the occasion arises where they need that.
Thank you.